that you wish to begin with?
I heard something that I don't know how to
Well, you should not
qualify.
listen. You should not listen to rumors.
Right. That's why I'm asking.
Oh, okay.
If someone is Basari and they accidentally eat a wafer, a chocolate wafer that they did not know
It's an
was.
interesting question. Can a person be bisari?
Oh wow.
Yeah, the answer to this question is no. Although bisar ha'adam is indeed asur, it does not have a din of being bisari. Same thing with mother's milk. Although it is indeed milk, it does not have the din of being halavi.
Wow.
So a human cannot be basari. A human can be in waiting time after having eaten basar. Okay, now what happens to this unfortunate person who's in his waiting time or in her waiting time? A wafer,
So
a wafer.
so there's a waiting time and they eat a halabi wafer by accident.
Yeah,
It's not
yeah.
intentional.
Yes. The tikkun is to roll around in the snow for at least 10 minutes. And if you live in a place without snow, you should fly to a place with snow as soon as the airport is open and roll around in snow for at least 10 minutes. That would be the tikkun.
Now we'll fix everything.
I hope you will not be surprised to hear that there's a machlokas poskim. According to most poskim, the mainstream view, although you made the mistake of having something chalavi when you shouldn't have because you're in a waiting time, you should stop eating and not continue eating it. That's the majority view. There are poskim who hold, not many. There is a minority view that since you already broke your waiting time by having something chalavi inadvertently, well, you can just continue having chalavi. That is a minority opinion, but of course, good advice is always to follow the mainstream. The a more this is a matter of minhag. A more halachic question would be, what happens if after pronouncing the bracha on the chalavi wafer and you're moving it towards your mouth, eat it now? I shouldn't be eating this, but I already made the bracha. If I refrain from eating it, I'll be guilty of a bracha levatala, which is a true isur. If I do eat it, I'll be guilty of violating a minhag. This is an unfortunate situation where whatever you do, even if you do nothing, you'll be in violation of something. And the rule is hakal hakal. You have to always choose the least severe violation whenever you find yourself in a situation where whatever you do, you're going to violate something. Of course, it's preferable to violate the minhag, which is less severe than making a bracha levatala. Having already pronounced the bracha, then you should have a bite. According to most poskim, then you will not continue beyond that. According to a minority view, it would be okay to even continue. Okay, are there any other questions of a halachic nature before we begin? Okay, yes, Jody.
Sorry. Yes, I do have something. Can you clarify for me, please?
Is it true? Is it true what they say about Australians that they are required by law to vote in the elections?
Yes, you get fined if you don't vote.
Yeah, fine if you don't vote. Okay, well, I hope the right guy won.
Did not, alas.
In any event,
Yeah, my question is, if you have, before Pesach, if you have like pots that are clean, your chametz pots that are clean, you don't kasher them, you lock them away for Pesach. Do you need to sell them?
you do not need to sell them, and indeed, you should not sell them. Because if you do sell them, then when you get them back, you're going to have to immerse them in a mikveh,
That's okay.
having been owned by a non-Jew. The standard shtar, which is used by rabbis to sell chametz, specifies that they're selling only the tam balua, only the chametz absorbed in the pots and pans, but not the pots and pans themselves.
So that would be the reason that one doesn't use those pots on Pesach without koshering them properly first, for example,
Mm-hmm.
because they absorb chametz. It wouldn't be enough to have them clean. But then, so I'm just a little bit confused, because if you're selling, so you shouldn't sell, you lock them up, you don't use them, but you don't sell them, even though the chametz absorbed in them is sold.
Correct. And selling the absorbed chametz is itself only a chumrah, and halachically not required. Halachically, it is sufficient just to put the clean chametz stick pots away in a cabinet.
Right.
Now, there's a machlokas poskim. There are some poskim who actually permit using the chametz stick pots and pans, dishes. People have beautiful dishes, beautiful service, which they use all year long. There are poskim, not many, there are poskim who permit cleaning that and displaying it high on the wall as decoration. Most poskim require actually putting it away, but there are poskim who even permit displaying it for decoration if you have beautiful things, which many people do. Let me make two more comments about chametz, which are important. Two more comments which are important this time of year. Number one, according to the Shulchan Aruch, there are two chumrot. The Shulchan Aruch has two strict opinions which are universally embraced by the poskim. Strict opinion number one, afilu misha bitel et chamitzo, even someone who recited kol chamira and was mavatal der chametz in their heart, and therefore escaped any violation of Pesach, min ha-Torah, it is sufficient just to be mavatal the chametz in your heart, typically done by reciting kol chamira. Even someone who did that and then discovers his or her chametz after Pesach in the house, that chametz is usher after Pesach, chametz she'avar lava Pesach. That's one chumrah. Even though you were not truly guilty of violating chametz because you were mavatal, still the chametz is usher after Pesach. Chumrah number two, afilu misha shogeg, even someone who unwittingly and unknowingly had chametz in the house over Pesach and discovers it after Pesach, that chametz is also usher after Pesach. So here we have two dinim, each derabanan. Chametz after Pesach is only derabanan. We're machmir, even if you were mavatal, and even if you were shogeg. Now these are two separate halachas, and therefore two separate chumrot. What happens in the case where someone was both mevatel and also shogeg? If someone was mevatel and also shogeg, talking about a frum person who said kol chamira and was mevatel the chametz in his or her heart before Pesach, and through inadvertence missed some chametz in the house and discovered it after Pesach. According to most poskim, there's no reason to place two chumrot simultaneously on the same person in an isur, which is only derabanan. And therefore, if you were mavatal, your chametz is usher after Pesach. If you were shogeg, your chametz is usher after Pesach. But if you were both mevatel and shogeg, then the chametz is mutter after Pesach. Let me give you one big example. Imagine a storekeeper who sells his chametz in the store. He sells it over Pesach, and I, being frummer than frum can be, surely frummer than thou, I hold that the sale of chametz over Pesach is humbug and doesn't work and cannot be relied upon. Oh, now, how am I to relate to the pasta which is in that store, or more importantly, how am I to relate to the beer which is on the shelf in that store after Pesach? If we're talking about a frum shopkeeper, so of course he or she said kol chamira, and he or she was mavatal the chametz in the heart before Pesach. and the person thought that the mechira through the agency of a Rav is valid, I think they're all wrong. But that person thought that they were doing the right thing, and therefore, even though I do not rely upon the mechira of chametz over Pesach, the pasta and the beer, which is on the shelf in the store after Pesach, is fine. Okay. Any other issues of a halachic nature?
Just one more thing.
Sure.
So if you locked, just going back to that, if you locked up your, if you had in mind, or you put like a sold for Pesach on your chametz pots, after Pesach, whether or not they've taken possession of their chametz or not, you have to rekasher your pot.
You do not have to rekasher the pot.
Under what circumstances would you have
to? Never. I explain.
Sorry, toivel.
Toivel. No, toivel. Only if the document, only if there was a mistake in the document, and the sales document said that the utensils are being sold to a goy. If it says that in the document that someone made a mistake, it shouldn't say that. The sales document should say it's only the absorbed chametz which is being sold and not the utensils themselves.
Right. So in the cupboard where the chametz pots are, it makes no difference if that's sold for Pesach or it's not sold for Pesach. It's understood that it's just the absorbed chametz that's sold, and you do not have to retovel your pots.
Precise. You do not have to retovel the pots.
So is there any circumstance under which you would have to?
Only if the Rav made some serious mistake and bad formulation of the document, which I never heard of this actually happening.
Okay. And is it a problem if you don't say sold for Pesach and you just say don't use for Pesach?
No, that's fine. That's fine. Okay. You don't have to say sold.
Okay.
Let me just explain the conceptual basis a little bit deeper. In order to be guilty of Bali or Bali Matzeh, in order to be guilty of having chametz on Pesach, it has to be real, observable chametz. Absorbed taste in the utensils, although it has the halachic status of chametz, is not chametz at all, because you can't see it. It's not observable. If you look at the pot, all you see is a pot. You don't see the absorbed chametz taste. Therefore, you are not guilty of owning chametz if it's only a question of the absorbed taste of chametz in the utensils.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Now are we ready to turn to Sfiras Omer, or we have other issues? Now, let me see if I can remember from before Pesach how to get this on the screen. Share. Double click. Voila. Okay. Now, during Sfiras Omer, it says in the Shulchan Aruch, here's the text of the Shulchan Aruch, and as usual, I don't mention the exact chapter and paragraph number because you have that on the screen. Nohagim shelo lisa isha. It is customary, the Shulchan Aruch knows the difference between halacha and minhag. Nohagim, it is customary not to marry a woman during ben Pesach la'atzeres, between Pesach and Shavuos, at least ad Lag BaOmer, at least until Lag BaOmer. Why do we have this minhag? Well, everyone knows. Mipnei shebe'oto zman metu talmidei Rabbi Akiva, because Rabbi Akiva's disciples died in large numbers during this time period. Now, this is a minhag. The historical origin of the minhag, it's not in the Mishnah. It's not in the Gemara. It's not in the Midrash. It's not anywhere in Talmudic literature in the biggest sense, including all the Midrashim and everything that Chazal has given us. There's no hint of this anywhere in Chazal, in the writings of Chazal. The origin is in the Geonim, And a little bit later today, we're going to be reading the tshuvas written by the Gaonim. It's in the Gaonic period after the close of the Gemara that this minhag was introduced, which is why it is a minhag and not a halacha. If the origin were in the Mishnah or Gemara or in the words of Chazal, then it would be a halacha. But no, it all originated later. Now, as you know, the wedding ceremony really has two parts. We combine the two parts together at the chuppah, but really there's the giving of the ring, technically called kiddushin, and then the nisuin, which is the chuppah. We do these together. We have the giving of the ring under the chuppah, but that's a fairly modern development. Fairly modern in the grand scope of history. It's fairly modern. Back in the days of the Crusades, the way they used to do it before the Holy Crusades, the way they used to do it was Hassan would give the Kala the ring, and she would continue to live with her family, and he would continue to live with his family, and they wouldn't actually get married with a chuppah until around a year later. Now, this might sound strange to you, but remember, we're talking about Hassan and Kala, who were 10, 11, 12 years old. The giving of the ring locked them together in a marriage relationship. They couldn't marry anyone else, and the parents could sigh a great sigh of relief. They're locked together. Don't have to worry about shidduchim anymore, but they're only 11, 12 years old. A year later, they'll have the chuppah, and then they will live together in the same household. With the Crusades, in Jewish communities in Europe, no one knew whether they would be around a year later, and therefore these two elements were combined in one, and we do it all one right after another. But since it's two separate mitzvahs, that's why we have 2 cups of wine under the chuppah, 1 cup of wine for the brachas on the giving of the ring, and a separate cup of wine for the brachas of the chuppah. It's really 2 things that we do together. So, in any event, the Shulchan Aruch says the minhag is not to do second stage, the final stage, the completion of the marriage process. We don't do during this time of year. Aval na'ares l'kadesh, but the giving of the ring, that, shapir dummy, that's fine to do this time of year. After all, they're not going to be living with each other yet, and therefore we don't have the final simcha of the wedding. Just giving the ring and locking them into a marriage relationship, that was okay. None of this is appropriate nowadays because we do it all within a minute or two of each other. Nisuin nami, and even getting married, even the final step, the nisuin, the final step, the chuppah, even that, misha kafatz v'kanas, someone who jumps up and does it, even though you shouldn't have gotten married this time of year, someone who does it, ein onshenoto, we do not penalize the people who do it. This year you shouldn't do it, but if someone does it, no penalty. And as the Ramah points out, from Lag BaOmer on, everything is okay. Different minhagim about exactly which block of 30 days, the initial block of 30 days up to Lag BaOmer, or starting from Rosh Chodesh and going all the way to Shavuos, and different minhagim of exactly which block of 30 days this minhag should apply to. But that's what it's all about. At this point, I want to try to understand the foundation of minhag, the force of minhag, the authority of minhag. How important is this? Let's take a look at the authority of minhag, the power of minhag, the reason to do minhag. Now, in order to understand the tshuva we're about to look at, the tshuva we're about to look at was written by the Maharsham of Shmuel Medina. he was the great Rav in Turkey in the generation right after the expulsion of the Jews from Spain. I think he was actually born in Spain, or if he wasn't born in Spain, he either came to Turkey as a baby from Spain at the time of the expulsion, or was just born around that time in Turkey. I don't know whether his mother was still pregnant during the expulsion or not. In any event, the Sfaradim who fled Spain and Portugal ended up in all kinds of places: Alexandria, Rhodos, Hamburg, London, Amsterdam, Smyrna, Gushta, Constantinople. They ended up all kinds of places. And in many of the places where they arrived, they arrived in such numbers that they took over the local Jewish communities wherever they arrived. Sometimes they came to well-established Jewish communities like Alexandria. And then we have two minhag communities side by side. The indigenous Alexandrian Jewish community, which had been there since the days of the Beit HaMikdash, and they had their minhagim. And next door, the newcomers, the Sfaradim, established their synagogue and their community with their Spanish minhagim. And they called themselves, the indigenous Jews whose families had been there since the days of the Beit HaMikdash. They called themselves the Mustaravim, the Arab Jews, because they spoke Arabic. The newcomers were called Sfaradim because they spoke Sfaradi. They spoke Spanish. Well, Spanish from those days. He's not. They spoke medieval Spanish. We see that also in Amsterdam, also in London, where the Sfaradim arrived in Jewish communities which were well established. On the other hand, they also arrived in many places where there were tiny Jewish communities to start with, and the Sfaradim completely overwhelmed the local Jewish communities. This is particularly true not only in places where the indigenous Jewish population was very small, it's also true in many places where the indigenous Jewish population before the expulsion was very poor, living in destitute poverty. And here come this wave of Sfaradim, and they were wealthy professional people. They were weavers, they were dyers, they were financially far better off than the local Jews. They established new industries, weaving, dyeing, and so forth and so on. And being wealthy and numerous, they of course overwhelmed the local Jewish community, which was in destitute poverty and in very small numbers to start with, and they all became Sfaradim. The local people were just absorbed into the very successful, growing Sephardic community, and that's what happened in Smyrna, this town in Turkey, which the Maharaj is talking about. So now you have the historical background. Let's see what the Maharaj wrote about this town in Smyrna. What happened was a local Turkish Jew whose family had been there since the days of the Beis HaMikdash, and they had their minhagim. He wants to know whether he can daven in the new Sephardic synagogue, magnificent synagogue, unlike the local indigenous synagogue, which is not so elegant. Could the local Jews go daven in the elegant Sephardic synagogue? If they do so, which minhag should they follow? Should they follow the minhagim of Kaddish, Kedusha, and so forth, as done by the Turkish Jews, or as done by the Sephardic Jews? Here is the Maharashdam's answer. Lo matzanu, v'lo ra'inu. We know of no source. The Maharashdam wrote, it's right in the 17th century, we know of no source. She'ein lishanot minhag avotenu. We know of no reason to refrain from changing the minhagim of our forefathers. Of course, we can change the minhagim of our forefathers. Of course, there's no obligation to follow the minhagim of your forefathers, whether it's Turkish or Sephardic. Of course, you can change. Unless we're talking about something which has a nidnud, a little bit of prohibition in it. Minhagim divide into two categories. There are minhagei kum va'aseh, minhagim of things you do it this way, you do it that way. And the second category is minhagei lo ta'aseh, minhagim of things you don't do this, you don't do that. Well, of these two categories, the only category which we are obliged to conform to the minhag of the past are the prohibitive minhagim, a minhag to refrain from eating rice on Pesach, if you come from a community which has such a minhag. A minhag to refrain from eating matzah shruya gebrockt, matzah balls, knedlach, if you come from a community which has such a minhag not to do this, not to do that. Well, that is the kind of minhag that we are obliged to follow. On the other hand, a positive minhag, a minhag kum va'aseh, a minhag to do this or do that, there's not a single source anywhere that tells us that such minhagim are obligatory. Now, when I first read this many years ago, I said, that can't possibly be true. There must be examples of minhag in the Mishnah, in the Gemara, in the Rishonim, the Rambam, in Rashi, in the Ritva. There must be some example somewhere of minhagim, of kum va'aseh, minhagim of things that you do. And I started looking and couldn't find. I have a shelf full of minhag svarim, each of which has a lengthy introduction. And I say, oh, surely if I read through the introductions of the minhag svarim, I'll find plenty of examples in Chazal or in the Rishonim of minhagim, which are of a positive nature, do this or don't do that. And I searched and said, well, to this day, I've not found a single example. The Maharajadam had such bikias, such broad knowledge of the totality of rabbinic literature, Chazal and the Rishonim up to the 17th century, that he knew there's not a single example of that. And he seems to be right, seems to be correct on that. Now, it therefore follows that anything of a prohibitive nature you're stuck with, but anything of a positive nature, you use this text of the Siddur or that text of the Siddur, this melody or that melody. Men put their tefillin this way or that way. Women cover their eyes this way or that way when they light Shabbos candles. Well, these are all things you do, as opposed to things you don't do. Therefore, feel free to change however you like. Change every day if you want. There's nothing obligatory about them. Therefore, if a Turkish Jew wishes to daven in the Sephardic synagogue, it never happened the other way around. I mean, the Sephardim would not lower themselves to daven with the indigenous Jewish population. That never happened. But you want to convert from being a Turkish Jew to a Sephardic Jew, go ahead. Nope, use their siddur, use their melodies, no problem at all. Since there's nothing prohibitive, there's no isur involved, there's no prohibition in the text of the siddur. We're only talking about things you do as opposed to things you don't do. Lo harchakata there, there's nothing about avoiding sin in choosing your nusach of tefillah. Pshita, it's therefore obvious to lo shayach be'alti tosh Torah simecha. It's therefore obvious that the Torah principle that we have to follow the minhagim of our families does not apply to the nusach, the text of the siddur. And if you look at what the Rishonim say, you'll understand that this is clearly what they meant. These are the words of the Ran. Nimtzenu l'meidim b'Torah minhagim shekol minhag isur hu me'ir achat. The Rishonim say every minhag isur, any minhag touching upon a prohibition, is obligatory within the city. Kol she'eno minhag b'taut ela hechmiro al atzman siag lidvar. Anything which the people refrain from as an extra fence around the Torah, anything which the people prohibit upon themselves as an extra fence around the Torah, that is obligatory. And even in private, if you're not in public. Well, we see, therefore, that according to the Maharashdam, minhagim divide into two categories. The prohibitive ones you're stuck with. The positive ones, feel free to change whatever you want, no obligation there at all. Now, of course, the question arises, is this opinion of the Maharashdam a maverick opinion, which is rejected for some reason by mainstream poskim, or is this an opinion which is embraced by principal poskim, by mainstream poskim? Let's take a look at the Mishpatei Uziel. Mishpatei Uziel was written by Rav Ben-Zion Uziel. He was the Rishon LeZion, the chief Sephardic rabbi back in the days of Rav Kook. Rav Kook was the Ashkenaz, and Rav Uziel was the Sephardi. The two got along wonderfully with each other, and they were both very influential in their spheres. In any event, back in the days of Rav Uziel, which those were the days of Rav Kook, well, trust me on this, Israelis started speaking Hebrew. Prior to this period of time, Hebrew was not the common language in Eretz Yisrael. There were Jews speaking Arabic, there were Jews speaking Ladino, there were Jews speaking Greek, but Hebrew was used only when Jews from two different language groups wanted to speak with each other. If a Sephardi wanted to speak with an Ashkenazi, he speaks Arabic and Persian, he speaks Yiddish and Russian. Well, to communicate with each other, they would speak Hebrew. But aside from these relatively rare situations, Hebrew was not used as a common spoken language. All this began to change back in the days of Rav Kook and Rav Uziel, where parents started speaking only Hebrew at home, and children grew up with Hebrew as their first language. Hebrew as a first language began around this time of this period of history. Now, as you know, Israeli Hebrew pronunciation is not the traditional Ashkenaz pronunciation. And Israeli pronunciation of Hebrew is also not the traditional Sephardic pronunciation. It's a new thing, which the Israelis created. They do not distinguish between taf with a dagesh in it and saf without a dagesh in it. They do not distinguish between patah, and komutz, or. They do not distinguish between aleph and ayin. They do not distinguish between kaf and qaf. They do not distinguish between chaf and het. Israeli pronunciation is a new thing. And therefore, the chief rabbis, Ashkenazim asked Rav Kook, Sfaradim asked Rav Uziel, are we allowed to abandon our traditional Moroccan pronunciation, our traditional Yemenite pronunciation, our traditional Polish pronunciation, our traditional Litvish pronunciation? Are we allowed to abandon that in davening and Kriyat Torah and Kedusha situations? And are we allowed to use Israeli pronunciation for Kriya Shema and reading the Torah and things like brachot and things like that? Rav Kook paskined in a Yeshiva, no. Every minhag community, whether you come from Tunis, Istanbul, Warsaw, or Vilna, it doesn't matter where you come from, you have to follow the traditional pronunciation of your community. The reason he held that is because lechatchila, precision is required in Shema Yisrael and in reading the Torah and in every other Kedusha situation. Lechatchila, precision is required. And each minhag group has its ways of being precise. Yemenite Jews distinguish between Aleph and Ayin. Ashkenaz Jews distinguish between Litvish Jews distinguish between Patach A and Kometz A. Hungarian Jews distinguish between Patach A and Kumutz U, and so forth and so on. And you have to maintain these fine distinctions for precision in reading Shema Yisrael and other Kedusha situations. That was Rav Kook's opinion. Rav Uziel, his colleague, and they got along very well with each other, even though they disagreed on certain matters. They disagreed on this. He was asked, and he writes as follows. Ein bazeh kol tzad isur. There's absolutely no question of isur in your pronunciation. It's only what you do. It has nothing to do with what you refrain from doing. Mishum de minhag zeh ikaro eno davar isur. The pronunciation you use, Yemenite, Moroccan, Polish, Litvish, the pronunciation, American, the pronunciation you use is there's no isurim involved, and therefore ein babitul minhag zeh mishum al titosh Torah samecha, and then therefore there's no blocking, no reason to prohibit, no reason to object, no reason to block changing your pronunciation. Of course, you can embrace the Israeli pronunciation for Kriyat Shema and every other Kedusha situation. Just like we learned from the Maharashtam a few lines earlier. Well, you see that the tshuva of the Maharashtam, that positive minhagim, meaning things you do, as opposed to things you don't do, you're free to change. V'chein katav b'stei chemed, and the Maharashtam is not the only one who says this. We have in the Stei Chemed. Stei Chemed was written by Rabbi Yecheskel Medini. He was a Rav in some little town in what today is Baluchistan. One of these little villages, but he was one of the great poskim of the 19th century, and he writes, "Hine imutar lishanot menusach hatfilah me'Ashkenaz l'Sfarad." Can you change the text of the siddur you use between Ashkenaz and Sfaradi? Kvar herich bazeh b'chasdei Avraham shavish devarim al pi rashal heicha de b'di'eved mutter. Since there's no matter, no issue here of prohibition, of course you can change. Of course you're free to change from Ashkenaz to Sfard, the other way around, whichever minhag you like. Okay, so here we have an important idea. Now, as far as refraining from marriage during Sfiras Omer is concerned, that's something you don't do. That's legitimate territory for a minhag. We refrain from it. It's an isur. We don't get married during this period of time. So I've just demonstrated that the minhag to refrain from marriage is a legitimate minhag according to the rules. But there's another issue here. Birkas Hachama. Birkas Hachama is a bracha pronounced once every 28 years when the celestial bodies, when the sun returns to the beginning of a new cycle. There's a 28-year celestial cycle, and when that cycle begins again, there's a bracha to be recited. That's Birkas Hachama once every 28 years. Regarding this, the question arises, are there any minhagim when you do Birkas Hachama? Are there certain chapters of Tehillim that you're supposed to recite? Should you do it standing? Should you do it sitting? Should you do it early in the morning, late in the morning? Are there certain before Shacharis, after? Are there any minhagim about Birkas Hachama? The Mama Mordechai, his name was Mordechai Cremieux, 19th century rabbi in southern France. He says, Ani Omer d'vachol ki hai milsa. I say, anything like Birkas Hachama, lo havi ela mekaf ches shana lekaf ches shana, something like this, which is only once every 28 years, lo shayach minig. There's no such thing as a minhag in a rare occurrence. A minhag is something you customarily do. It has to be something which is, in halachic terminology, tadir, frequent. Frequent practices can be minhagim, but rare practices, once every 28 years, just because 28 years ago you were sitting for Birkas Hachama, or 28 years ago you were standing, doesn't mean you have a minhag to do it that way. Minhagim are, by definition, frequently occurring events. No, I don't know exactly. I cannot tell you exactly what the frequency is. I know 28 years is too long to wait for a minhag. Exactly how many years it has to be, I'm not in a position to say, but I know that 28 is too long. 28 years is too long. After all, what you did last time, 28 years ago, who knows why you did it? And who remembers why you did it? It's not important. Well, if you think about it, the frequency of marriage in anyone's life, some people do get married twice, some people get married 3 times, but for most people, the frequency of marriage is usually once in a lifetime, sometimes twice in a lifetime, but we're not talking about more frequently than every 28 years. I mean, it's not more frequent than that. After all, Birkas Hachama is twice in a lifetime. Maybe you'll be Zocha and live long enough to get it 3 times in a lifetime, but more than that, we're beyond 120 years already. Marriage also, how many times in a lifetime are you going to get married? I mean, there are people get married and divorced. I know my uncle. I had an uncle he divorced and married 8 times. The same woman. They couldn't live. They couldn't live with each other. They couldn't live without each other. My father, Zichrono Levracha, even knew exactly which children were born from which marriage. I can't keep that straight, but full brothers and sisters. But that's a rarity, right? So although refraining from getting married during Sfiras Omer is legitimate territory for a minhag because it's something you don't do, it's prohibitive in nature, but it's not frequent enough to qualify as a minhag. So now we have to wonder, how is it possible if there are no minhagim regarding Birkas Hachama every 28 years, how can there be minhagim regarding marriage, which you do typically only once in a lifetime? As I mentioned earlier, the whole source of the minhag is not in Talmudic literature in the broadest sense, including all the midrashim and everything. The Makkah, the source of not getting married is in the Gaonim. Let's take a look at the words of the Gaonim in Babylonia after the close of the Talmud. The following is a tshuva of Rav Haigon. He was one of the great Gaonim. Shaltem, you ask me, Lama ein nosim nashim ben Pesach latzeres? Why do we refrain from getting married between Pesach and Shavuos. Aviyodim, you have to know. Shelo mishum isur. There's no prohibition to get married. Ela mishum minhag avelus. It's all a minhag because of the mourning of the deaths of the disciples of Rabbi Akiva. She'amru, as it says in the Gemara, Shnei Masa Elef Zugot Talmidim Hayul Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva had 12,000 pairs of Talmidim who were chavrusas with each other, and they all died during this period of the year. So because of Avelus, that's why we refrain from getting married. Nahagu harishonim biyamim ele shelo lichnos behem. And therefore the minhag is not to do the knisa, not to do the nisuin, not to do the chuppah, not to do the second final completing stage of the marriage process. Misha kafatz v'kanas. Someone who jumps up and gets married, even though there's a minhag to refrain from it, ein konsum. Inanu konsum la'onish lo malchus. We have no penalty. We have no penalty. Okay, up to this point, we've not learned anything substantially new. We've just added the tiniest details, the number of Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva who died, the tiniest details we've added, but nothing substantially new. Here comes the new idea. Aval. Imba lish'ol l'chatchila. If the young couple comes to the rabbi and asks about getting married, ein anu morim lo lichnos. We do not instruct them about getting married. Oh. We, rabbis, refrain from acting as Masada Kedushin. We rabbis refrain from supervising chuppot during this time of year. Oh, now for rabbis, supervising chuppot, why do you want a rabbi at the chuppah? Lahavdil. For the same reason you want a lawyer to accompany you if you buy a house, so you have a big transaction. Of course, you want a lawyer to accompany you to make sure that everything is going to be legally kosher. Similarly, when you get married, you want to make sure that everything is going to be halachically correct. So of course you want a rabbi there to supervise. That's the Masada Kedushin. And the Masadre Kedushin, the rabbis who supervise weddings, for them, it's a frequent occurrence. In large kehilot, in large communities, rabbis might be supervising weddings several times a week in large communities. So rabbis have a minhag to refrain from involving themselves in the marriage ceremony during this time of year. That's a minhag lo ta'aseh, something the rabbis refrain from doing. And for them, all year long, it's a relatively frequent occurrence. And therefore, it's a legitimate minhag for the rabbis not to supervise weddings. On the other hand, someone who did not bother consulting with the rabbi and just gathered a few friends together and put up a chuppah and they got married, they didn't do anything wrong. They didn't violate any minhag. It's not their minhag not to get married. It's our minhag of the rabbis not to involve ourselves in the chuppah process. Therefore, ein onshenoto. Therefore, there's no penalty because they didn't do anything wrong. Ulinian Kiddushin, as far as the giving of the ring, the first step, typically a year earlier, Misha Chatzal Kadesh Ben Pesach L'Atzeres, it's okay to get married. It's okay to give the ring during this period because the Ikar Simcha is not until the marriage is completed at the chuppah. Oh, so when we look at the source in the words of the Gaonim, we now have a clear understanding of the minhag to refrain from getting married. It is a legitimate minhag because it is prohibitive in nature. And it is a legitimate minhag because it's the rabbis who have the minhag, and for them, supervising weddings is a relatively frequent event. Let's just point out that Rabbi Yitzchak ibn Geis was right on the cusp of history, at the end of the Gaonic period and the beginning of the Rishonim. Historians love to devote long dissertations to pinning down the periodization of history, exactly when one period of history ends and another period begins, all of which is very interesting and very important for historians. But, well, Rav Yitzhak Ibn Geas was exactly at that cusp of history. Some historians will categorize him as a Gaon. Some historians will categorize him as an early Rishon, but I don't know if there's any I don't know why you should care one way or another if you're not a historian. He writes, Minhag b'chol Yisrael shelo lisa ben Pesach v'atzeres. Minhag throughout all the Jewish world is not to get married, and it's because of the mourning, the Avelis of the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva. Me'otasha ve'elech na'agu lisabel. The minhag already began back in Talmudic times, but they never mentioned it. As soon as the Talmidim died, the minhag to refrain from marriages began during this period of the year, even though it's never mentioned. And now the Gaonim were the great rabbis of the yeshivas in Babylonia, and they were the rabbis of the same yeshivas where in previous generations Chazal were the Rashi yeshiva, and those yeshivas had, number one, archives, and therefore when a Gaon says something about the Talmudic period, he might be reporting something he read in the archives of the yeshiva, archives which existed from the days of the Gemara. So a lot of weight has to be attached to the words of the Gaonim when they speak about what was going on in the earlier Talmudic period. Further, bear in mind that the Rashi Yeshiva, the heads of the Yeshiva in Babylonia, were the direct disciples of the great rabbis of the Gemara. And therefore, the Gaonim might be reporting what they heard from their teacher, who was one of the rabbis of the Gemara. So here we have two reasons to give great weight to whatever the Gaonim say about Talmudic matters. Number one, they might be reporting what they read in the archive of the yeshiva. Number two, they might be repeating what they heard from their rabbi who was alive and active and was one of the great rabbis of the Gemara. On the other hand, it could also be conjecture. We're not absolutely definitively sure that it's Karpa has great weight, and he's of the opinion that the refraining from getting married was already common in Talmudic days. V'dafka nisuin, but only the second stage, the final stage of getting married, is something to refrain from. Misha kafatz v'kanas, if they get married without benefit of rabbinic advice, we do not penalize them, but if they come to the rabbi and ask the rabbi to supervise, the rabbi says, no, during this period of the year, I do not supervise weddings. Let's see how this plays out in the Acharonim, in the modern period. The Shulchan Aruch Harav, or the Balatanya, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, wrote as follows: Noagim shelo lisa isha v'shelo listaper ben Pesach le'atzeres. We have a minhag not to get married this time of the year because of all of those Talmidim. Here's a slightly different calculation about the number of Talmidim, because of all the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva who died. Aval mutar lasot shiduchim. It's okay to do shiduchim this period of time, shema yikad mu'acher, in order to lock chassan and kala into a marriage relationship. We're not completing the marriage yet. They're still not living with each other. We've not yet done the chuppah, but at least make the agreement about getting married. That's okay. Mutar gamkein lasot seuda lachar shiduchim. If you're making an engagement, it's okay to make a big seuda to celebrate that, but without dancing and music. Of course, no singing and dancing is permitted this time of year. If it's singing and dancing of reshus, not mitzvah nature. Singing and dancing of a mitzvah nature, like on Shabbos or at Sheva brachas. Sheva brachas might occur at this time during this. If they got married just before, then they could still be in Sheva brachas for this period of time. It's okay to make a party, to make a celebration if they get engaged, but without singing and dancing. Tov, these are the basic ideas which I wanted to cover today. Are there any questions that you have at this time?
Looks shalom. Okay, I thought someone had their hand up. I first wanted to ask,
Can I
text...
Go
for it. Go for it. No, your hand was up. Your hand was up. Go for it.
Can I ask a question, please?
Yes, sure.
Yeah. Okay, so during that time, we don't buy new clothes because of but they have the biggest clothes sales after Pesach. They have tremendous sales reduction of 30 up to 50% of clothes that some people like me would like to buy. What do we do? Buy it and put it aside until after Shavuot, or
yes.
just not buy, or what to do?
Yes, you can buy the clothing which is on sale and put it aside until Lag BaOmer or until Shavuot, depending upon which block of time you are following for the mourning, for the Avelis. You can definitely do that. And let me add one important point. New clothing is fine, l'tzorech mitzvah, as the Mishnah Brura and all the other great poskim say. Someone who's getting married and all the people associated with the marriage, the parents, the siblings, everyone involved in the marriage, that's a mitzvah opportunity, even though the marriage is not going to be until after Lag BaOmer or until after Shavuos. All the preparations, buying the clothing, sewing the clothing, preparing everything for the chuppah, that's a mitzvah endeavor. And even though we are in mourning, you can do that.
Thank you. Can I ask another question?
Sure.
Okay. So also all the new fruits for some reason come out after Pesach, like nectarine and mishmish. And so if I see that, maybe by after Shavuot, the season is gone.
Correct.
What do we do? We don't eat the nectarine and the mishmish because of that?
Preferably, if you can, if it's practical, wait until Shabbos to eat it and make a shechianu on Shabbos. If that's not practical, it'll spoil before then. It won't be good if you wait so long. Then eat it now and make a shechianu now.
So we can say shechianu between Pesach to Lag BaOmer if we eat it on Shabbat.
Yes, and that's if that's practical. If the nectarine is going to spoil before Shabbos, then do it before it spoils.
Thank you, Kodarav.
Okay.
Thank you for asking. It's really interesting. And Chaim, I wanted to ask it seems like a lot of places it says Mishe kafetz v'kanes.
Misha kafatz v'kanas, right?
That seems like very is the word like informal language, almost like slang. I wanted to ask why that was the choice of words, and you might know more about it as a linguist.
Oscar Wilde was once walking in his garden. How do I do this? Oscar Wilde was once walking in his garden with his daughter, and in the conversation, he said something, and his daughter said to him, "Father, you've just misused an English word." To which Oscar Wilde responded, "What do you mean?" And she said, "According to the Oxford English Dictionary, you've used that word improperly. The meaning is not as you intended." To which Oscar Wilde responded, "The Oxford English Dictionary exists to report the way I use the English language." The way Shakespeare used the English language is acceptable. That's correct English. The way Rambam, Rashi, Chazal, the Rishonim and the Poskim use the Hebrew language, that's proper and correct Hebrew. In order to qualify as slang, it has to be something which the great writers would shy away from and would not say.
So kafetz v'kanes, jump up and to enter into the marriage agreement. That's not.
That's fine. That's fine. That's good. That's good Hebrew. Okay. If you feel free to use the expression in broader contexts, kafatz v'kafatz, to do this, to do that, for anything. It's fine.
That's v'kanes. Wow. Okay, that's good to know.
Rav Fink, oh, sorry, Paul. Sorry.
No, I'll ask till the end of days. You go. You ask one.
Okay.
So basically, this is the reason what you've explained. This is the reason why you can change whether you keep from Rosh Chodesh to Shavuot or Pesach to like Omer.
Correct. Correct. According to the Mishnah Berurah and other poskim, you can change from year to year. If you know you're going to be invited to a wedding or something, you can change your block of time appropriately from year to year. You can, yes.
But it would
You
not
have
be
to have a
appropriate.
reason. Yeah.
The minhag is to have a 30-day block of time where you observe a velus, which block can be changed from year to year.
But you have to have a specific reason like that.
Well, why would you do it if you don't have a reason? Yes, one should have a reason. You should have a reason for everything you do.
Well, yeah. Okay, so if the reason is some other member of your family has something on and they're going to do this and it's just more convenient for you all to do the same thing. Yeah, that's a reason. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
It sounds like it would not be appropriate to begin at Rosh Chodesh Iyar and then end at Lag BaOmer, because it would be cutting both.
Correct.
And,
Correct.
right.
As the Mishnah Berurah says regarding that specific point, you follow either the chumrot of Beit Shammai or the kulot of Beit Hillel, but not the kulot of both and not the chumrot of both. You should be consistent. Okay.
I wanted to also ask about this is the last question. The positive minhagim, can be changed. Then it seems like tefillah could be a lot shorter. Yeah.
Well, unless of course you're with the tzibur. If you're with the tzibur, then we have a separate issue, asur lifrosh min tzibur. If you're with the tzibur, you should follow the practice of the tzibur.
Aha. Okay. But there is a lot in there that's positive minhagim.
But still, if they're saying Tehillim, you should say Tehillim with them.
Yes. No, it's wonderful and it is praiseworthy. I guess I'm looking to know I realize this could be applied for
as far as what you do in private is concerned. The only possible way, the only correct way to decide what you're going to do in private is the Rabbi Fink way. How fortunate you are to be able to hear the only possible way to decide what to do in private. Here goes. Follow whatever minhag you like. It doesn't matter in the slightest, as long as kavanato l'shem shamayim, as long as you make the choice of minhag, as long as you make the choice of which opinion you're going to follow, l'shem shamayim, as long as you're motivated for spiritual reasons, you've made the right choice. If you choose this approach or that approach because it'll make your life easier, you've chosen the wrong approach. If you choose this or that approach because people will respect you more for being a great tzaddik, you've made the wrong decision. Your decision should be motivated l'shem shamayim and not for ulterior motives.
Shekach.
Okay, let us then pause with this. In Yetz Hashem, we're going to continue next week. Until then, and feel free to send me by email. My email is davidfink.org.gmail. Here's my thing. At Gmail. There you have on chat. Did I type it correctly? Yeah. There you have on chat my email. Feel free to send me questions which you would like to incorporate in this series of shiurim. Feel free to send me issues and I'll make a shiur about it. Until next week, shalom, shalom.
Just under 12 years is the next Birkat HaChamah.
Oh, 12 years from now? I didn't calculate. Okay.
It's in 2037 on the Loazi years.
Okay. Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.